All right. So why don't you turn to your outline, get your notes out if you want to follow along with your notes, because you have all this stuff already. Unit 3 is about national income. And price determination. And the first thing on the docket for tonight is aggregate demand. All right, so why don't we start with talking about the determinants of aggregate demand, okay? And if you went to your notes, you would find the four components of GDP. So we have C, I, G, and NX, right? Those are our four aggregate demand determinants. So anything that would change GDP would also change aggregate demand. And remember that when we talk about aggregate demand, we're really referring to, the total amount of buying in the economy. Aggregate demand is all about buyers, okay? So when we break aggregate demand into our four components, okay, those are our buyers. Consumers, right? Our businesses that are spending on investment, the government, and people outside the U.S. that want to buy U.S. goods. Those are our buyers. Okay, so any change in any of those is going to change aggregate demand. A couple things that show up pretty consistently as determinants of the consumer component. One is going to be income. Two is going to be wealth. And let me remind you that income and wealth are two different things. Income is the amount of money you're taking home. Wealth is the value of the things that you own. Like your home is a big thing that could change value, and then you feel either wealthier or you feel poorer. Okay. Another thing that could change your wealth could be property values. Okay. I'm trying to think of another one. Oh, the stock market. Okay, would be another thing that could change wealth. So when wealth changes, then usually we see that spending changes along with it. Okay? So income, wealth, taxes. So when we get into fiscal policy and we talk about income taxes changing, the change in income taxes influence the C component of our aggregate demand. Okay? Because they either take money out of our pockets or they give us more money when they raise or lower taxes. So then we respond by spending more or spending less, okay? And the last factor that changes the C component is confidence. Okay, when we have a high consumer confidence, we spend more. Low consumer confidence, we spend less. And there's lots of things that can change consumer confidence, but that's it. Those are our four main factors that change the C component, okay? When any of those things change, ultimately, aggregate demand is going to change. Okay? All right, the I component is business investment. Okay, things that change business investment are going to be business taxes. B is business taxes. Okay? Business confidence. And the third main thing is interest rates. Probably the most important for us to know, because that's going to tie into monetary policy, right? But when interest rates change, that's going to change the amount of business borrowing and spending, which is going to change aggregate demand. Low interest rates encourage more borrowing and spending, so aggregate demand goes up. High interest rates discourage borrowing and spending, so AD is going to fall. Okay. I think the government spending determinant's pretty simple, right? Government spending either increases or decreases, and aggregate demand goes along with it. And then the net exports component. One thing I think that we should know is that, let's put here a recession I'm trying to think how to word this. A recession in a foreign country that we trade with. So we'll just say recession in trading partner. Okay, if that makes sense. And so what we're saying that if we trade with Canada, or if we trade with Mexico, or if we trade with China, and their economy changes, either for the good or for the bad, that is going to have an impact on our economy, and it's going to influence our aggregate demand. They're either going to buy more from us or buy less from us. So what happens in other countries influences the net export portion of our aggregate demand, and then influences the aggregate demand curve. Why don't we real quickly take a look at question 60. It's the very last question on the exam. 60. You guys don't have 60? Ah, that's funny. I guess I didn't give it to you. All right, I guess I cut the exam off by a page. So let me just... all right, there you go. There's question 60. Okay? Which the following will shift the aggregate demand curve to the right. Automatically, when you see that question, you need to start thinking about your determinants, right? C, I, G, or NX. And if you look at things that are happening, right, lots of great examples to get you to think, oh, maybe that's the right answer. But if you look, the answer is pretty simple, right? D, an increase in business spending, right? That's the I component of the aggregate demand. Okay? All right. Moving on. We are on now. Second part. Ooh, multipliers. Everybody loves multipliers. All right, now, real quick refresher. We're going to talk about 3 different multipliers today. Okay, I'm going to throw them all out to you now so you can start thinking about the difference and remembering the difference between each multiplier. The first multiplier we're going to talk about is the spending multiplier. Okay? The second is the tax multiplier. Now, focus, people. The spending and tax multiplier are multipliers that we use to figure out how changes in spending and changes in taxes are going to impact the GDP. Okay? Tax and spending multiplier, it changes, we can add this here, changes GDP. The third multiplier that we're going to talk about later on tonight is the money multiplier. And remember, the money multiplier is all about changing the money supply. So we have to keep those multipliers straight. Spending tax multiplier, change GDP. Money multiplier is all about changing the money supply. Okay? So let's start with our spending multiplier. Remember, mathematically, the spending multiplier is always 1 over the MPS. And occasionally we're asked what the MPS or what the MPC mean. So I think it's important that we know that the MPS, the marginal propensity to save, okay, is really referring to how much individuals in an economy are going to save when they receive new income. It's not how much they're going to save total. It's how much you save when new income is received. Okay? The MPC, marginal propensity to consume, is same thing, but it's how much you're going to spend when new income is received. So we're measuring Okay, how people's or individuals' spending and saving will change when they receive new money. Okay, is she gonna make it? You think? You gonna make it? All right. Doing some crazy. It's all good. Whatever you gotta do to survive. Okay, so that's important for us to know. Okay, now the quick example. Okay, let's say that we increase government spending equal to $5 million. Okay, we increase government spending by $5 million. And let's say that the MPC is equal to 0.8. That means that everyone's going to spend 80% of new income received. Okay, and that also tells us that the MPS must be 0.2, right? Because they always equal 1 together. So then we know that our spending multiplier is going to be 1 over 0.2, which is 5. Okay? 5 times the amount that the government's spending gives us the maximum increase in GDP. Now just know that when we use these multiplier concepts, the GDP can increase or decrease. So to figure out which direction the GDP is going to change, we need to identify if the policy being used is expansionary or contractionary. In this case, more dollars are being spent. That's an expansionary policy, right? So that would cause, ultimately, an increase in GDP. So that means that when, and real quick, when we're using the spending multiplier, the spending doesn't have to happen from the government. We see that happen most often because that's fiscal policy. But it could be you or it could be me or it could be anybody. It could be Joe Schmo spending money, okay? Or Joey Malone spending money. So it doesn't matter who's spending the money. What we need to know is when a dollar gets spent, that dollar is going to generate income for other people, right? When those people receive that income, they're going to save a portion, they're going to spend the rest, and that's going to have a multiplying effect on the GDP ultimately. And that's why we're calculating using this spending multiplier, okay? Questions on that at all? All right, take a look at question 44. 4-4. Just got a text. Pizza at the concession stand is half off right now. I should have them delivered up here. Huh? They don't. I'm sorry. All right. Hey, take a look at question 44. All right, this is a good question because it takes a concept. It takes a concept that we just talked about. This is common for the AP exam, and they add to the concept, make it just a little bit more difficult, and make you have to think a little bit. Okay. So the right answer, I'm sure most of you looked at the answer key by now. The right answer is B. Okay. So here's what's happening. We've got the government spending $100, right? What's our multiplier? 1 divided by 0.1, which is 10, right? The multiplier is 10. So that spending is going to increase by 100 times the multiplier 10, correct? But when exports decline, that's going to cause a negative impact, right? $60 times the multiplier. So you have a negative $600 impact because of the exports declining. Then you find the difference, and that's how you get an increase of $400. Questions on that at all? No questions? All right, moving on. Let's take a look at the tax multiplier. Stay focused, people. So the tax multiplier, same concept, except it's always one number less than the spending multiplier. Okay? One number less. The formula for calculating the tax multiplier is MPC divided by MPS. In the example that we used up here, our tax multiplier would have been 4. Okay? Now, what you have to remember, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, okay? When there's a change in taxes, you need to identify how that change in taxes is going to change the GDP and then make your calculation. For example, if there is a increase in taxes by a certain amount, whatever we increase taxes by, right? We multiply that by our multiplier, and that's going to have a negative effect on the GDP because increasing taxes takes money away from the economy and has a negative multiplying effect. So it's very, very important that you understand that you have to identify how the change in taxes is going to change GDP, and then know it's going to have either an increasing multiplying effect or a negative multiplying effect, depending on what is happening. Let's take a look at another good question. It's number 49. 49. Okay, yeah. Very good question. Listen here, okay? So the budget is getting at, our revenue, the money we have coming in and spending, okay? And if you look, we're taxing and spending by the same amount, right? So the budget isn't going to change at all. We're spending, 10 billion less, but we're also taxing 10 billion less. So our revenue should stay even, whatever it is. We won't have a greater deficit or a greater surplus. You follow me there? Right, but we're spending 10 billion less, but we're also bringing in 10 billion less because of taxes. So the budget won't be changing. If we had a deficit, we'll still have a deficit. If we had a surplus, we'll still have a surplus. You follow me there? Aggregate income is the same thing as aggregate demand or GDP. They're all the same. Remember, GDP is, all the dollars that we're spending in the economy. That turns into aggregate income. So I think that's important for us to know. Now, if you look at my what I put down here at the bottom, okay, the two actions are going to offset each other, right? There's a decrease in GDP because of the decrease in spending. There's an increase in GDP because of the lower taxes. But what we need to understand is that since the multipliers are different, okay, they do not cancel each other out. The change in spending is going to have a little bit larger impact on changing GDP than the change in taxes. So that means ultimately there's still going to be a decrease in GDP, or in this question, a decrease in aggregate income. So my answer then is going to be E. Questions on that at all? Good rule. Yeah, Hannah. What do you mean? You sure? Gotcha. I know that's the confusing thing, right? Is that the gotcha. So this is a great thing to know, though, is that the spending and taxes do not cancel each other out 100% because the multipliers are different. Okay, moving on to graphing aggregate demand. Graphing AD. Okay, now I think that we know, obviously we should know how to draw an aggregate demand graph, right? AD curve is always downward sloping. But don't forget, okay, that we did take some notes throughout the semester about why this curve is downward sloping. And I think that's important for us to know. The main reason why is because of what we call the wealth effect. And the wealth effect was just an example that economists give for why we buy more at lower prices than why we buy less at higher prices. Okay? And the idea is that when prices are low, the money that we have has more purchasing power, so we feel wealthier and we buy more. When prices are high, we have less purchasing power, right? We feel poor and we buy less. So the wealth effect explains why this action happens. Low price, buy more, or vice versa. Okay? Now, if you take a look at question 41 in the packet, this actually gets into another concept of why this curve is shaped the way that it is, called the interest rate effect. Just take a look at it, see what you think. The interest rate effect. Question 41. All right, let's walk through this a second. Aggregate demand curve is downward sloping because an increase in the price level in the economy. Okay, we're making some connections here. An increase in the price level in the economy will cause the demand for money. Now remember, the demand for money is the demand curve in our money market graph. We're going to talk about that graph later on tonight. Okay? But that's one of the determinants in that money market graph. If price levels go up, naturally people are going to hold more money as cash. So we're going to demand more money. Okay, so there will be an increase in the demand for money, which on the money market graph would cause the interest rates to increase. Okay, and we just put this down with our determinants for AD. When interest rates increase, investment spending, that's business spending, will fall. So there's a lot going on in this problem. Okay, but the answer choices are describing what we would call, and you have this in your notes, we call this the interest rate effect. It's just a second reason why, when prices go up, why we buy less in the economy. Okay? I'll walk you through that process one more time. Okay? Prices are going up in the economy. When prices go up, it's asking us what's going to happen to the demand for money. There will be a greater demand to hold on to money as cash when our prices are greater. Okay? That's going to increase that demand for money. When that demand for money increases, on the money market graph, the interest rate is going to go up. And when the interest rate goes up, people buy less stuff. We borrow less from the bank, therefore we buy less stuff. That's why B is the best answer for that. Okay, and that's a tricky question because there's a lot going on there. Joey. The thought process behind that is that when things cost more, people in the economy are naturally going to hold on to more money as cash to buy those things. I don't know if that really happens or not, but that's the idea. What's that? Yes. They decrease, they'd want less. Ian. Not the, that means price level can cause interest rates to go up, yes. But interest rates don't cause price level to go up necessarily. So it's a one-way street. Yes. Yep. Santi. Okay, so all we're really saying is that we're not showing any sort of a change on the aggregate demand curve. We're just saying that when prices go up in the economy in general, not necessarily on our graph, then this series of events will happen. Does that make sense? Okay, good question. All right, moving on. All right, let's get to our next thing, aggregate supply. And I'm going to go to a new sheet here. Aggregate supply. And we're going to start with, SRAS and LRAS. Okay, a couple things. Zach, you okay back there, man? All right. So a couple things about aggregate supply. One, we need to understand that the SRAS is really just a term or concept that's referring to our current production. So if we go back to aggregate demand is talking about buyers. It's the current amount people want to buy in the economy, okay? SRAS is the current amount that businesses are producing in the economy. AD is about buying. SRAS is about production. The LRAS really represents our potential production in the economy, okay? So hopefully that helps you kind of at least see the big picture of those concepts. AD is what we want to buy. SRAS is what we're producing. LRAS is potential production. Okay? Let's take a look at question 56. 56. My hope is after seeing a question like this, if you see this on the AP exam, it'll be a slam dunk. I've seen you shoot. You don't need jump shots. You need slam dunks. Right, eventually. All right. So I gave this to you as a rule of thumb during the semester, and I'm going to reiterate it now. Whenever they tell you that the aggregate supply curve is shaped a certain way, draw it that way. I know that seems like common sense, but I've had a lot of students ask me questions about questions like this over the years. And when I say, oh, well, it says that the aggregate supply curve is horizontal, and you drew it as an upward sloping line. So, yeah, that's going to make the question confusing. Draw it how they tell you to draw it. Now, what this is referring to, remember, in your notes, you have these different phases of aggregate supply, okay? And I don't really want to get into all of that tonight. It's not the most important thing. But just know that there are periods of time when the aggregate supply curve can be horizontal, right? And generally it's upward sloping. and there's times when it can be vertical. And when they give you a problem like this, they're just saying that for whatever reason, the economy is operating along this horizontal portion of our curve. Draw it horizontal, make the change, and then it should be a pretty easy question. So when we have an increase in government spending, we know that we're going to increase the AD, right? And there can't be any change in price level if we have a horizontal SRAS. So the only thing that can change would be an increase in GDP. Price level stays the same. It's all good from there. Okay? Just want to remind you that the SRAS can be, we don't draw it that way very often, but it can take on different shapes depending on, right? If you think back to, we said what causes the aggregate supply curve to have a different shape is all about input and output prices. Okay? When our curve is horizontal, that means that both the production price and the selling price are fixed for that period of time. They can't change. Regardless of what's happening in the economy, that curve remains horizontal. Questions on that at all? All right, moving on. Let's get to the determinants of SRAS. SRAS determinants. So we just gotta know what causes business production to change. I'm going to give you the 3 most common things. Okay? The first one is resource prices. Now, just know that there's different ways that this can show up and be described to you. Resource prices is how we put it in our determinants. It could also be production costs. It could be input prices. It could be the price of commodities. Okay, those are all resources, just different ways to say resource prices. So just know that there's a variety of ways to word resource prices. They all change the SRAS. Okay, and if you like to keep track of how these things do this, just remember, when we have cheaper resource prices, that allows us to increase production. We can buy our materials for cheaper. Raw materials would be another thing. Okay? When we buy them cheaper, okay, then we can produce more. Okay? When they cost, the resources cost more, then we can't produce as much stuff. Okay? All right, next. Business taxes. Business taxes. Okay? This is the amount of money that's being taken away or given to businesses in the form of taxes. And what we need to remember is low business taxes means that the business has more money so they can increase their production. That would increase the SRAS. Low taxes, increase production. High taxes, decrease production. What's significant about the business taxes determinant? Unique. Uniquely significant. What? It's the only determinant that can change both aggregate supply and aggregate demand. If you look, you have it down on your sheet twice, because we put it down twice now tonight. Okay? The only determinant that can change both. And if you don't believe me, take a look at question 27. 27. 27. Which of the following would cause both the aggregate demand and aggregate supply curves to shift right? Can only be one thing, right? Got to be a business tax, and the best answer is A. Now, business, corporate income tax, same thing. Okay? Business tax, corporate income tax, same thing. If we lower those, businesses have more money to spend. They also have more money to increase production. Bada boom, bada bing. And our last determinant that I wanted to cover, besides business taxes, is labor productivity. Labor productivity. Focus, people. When we increase our labor productivity, that increases our production. Our workers are now more better. No, they're more productive, right? They have better technology or better machines to be able to produce more. Okay? An example of an increase in labor productivity would be like an increase in technology or an increase in human capital. Okay? Those would both be examples of that. All right, next question. Question 40. 40. 40. So if you look at our determinants, okay, the only thing that's there that would cause a shift left, remember shift left is a decrease, okay, would be E, the increase, in per unit cost of production. That is fancy. This is what I mean, that resource costs show up in a variety of ways. That's just fancy for resource costs. We're paying more to produce our product, so we can't produce as much, so our SRAS is going to decrease. The first pick of the draft taken already? Wondering. Okay. Posted, please. I don't know. Kyler Murray. Think so? Woo! I wouldn't mess with a Buckeye. All right. Moving on. Let's get to the determinants of the LRAS. LRAS determinants. Remember, the factors that change the LRAS are land, labor, and capital. Land, labor, and capital. I think it's very, very important for us to make note that interest rates are a main driving force in determining how fast capital gets replaced in our economy. Low interest rates mean businesses are going to want to borrow and spend more on capital, and that will help our long-run growth. Low interest rates help our long-run growth because they allow our businesses to get more capital. High interest rates slow that growth down because we're not going to replace our capital as fast. Okay? So I think that's important for us to know that interest rates have a significant impact on changing the amount of capital in the economy. And then for labor, one thing that we see often is not necessarily how many workers that we have, but the quality of our workers, which we refer to as human capital. So human capital has a big impact on our labor force. When our labor force and our workers are better educated, they should be able to produce more. When they're less educated, they're not as productive. But remember, if you were ever asked about the LRAS, and really, you know what? A lot of questions don't say specifically which would change the LRAS. They ask, which of the following scenarios would change the economic growth. And these are the things. We need a change in land, labor, capital to change the growth. These would be your same determinants that would change or cause the production possibility curve to shift outward or inward. Okay? Because again, that curve represents the same thing the LRAS represents. Okay? Potential production. All right. Moving. Oh, yeah, let's go take a look at question 16. Question 16. 1, 6. So 16. So you see there, the question doesn't say specifically LRAS, but we need to know LRAS, long run growth. It's all the same. And knowing land, labor, capital, change the growth of the LRAS should make that question pretty easy, right? It's got to be E. Got to be E. Spending on capital, that increases our capital. Technology is capital. And changing the amount or the quality of our workers, all that changes our potential, Mr. Farney. Sorry, man. No. Nope. All right. Moving on. I got ketchup. All right. Let's start the graph. We are on macroeconomic equilibrium. Okay? Now I'm going to put here, I don't know, short and long run equilibrium. First graph. And this graph, aggregate supply, aggregate demand, guaranteed it shows up on the exam. Okay, guaranteed the graph that shows up more than any other graph. Okay? So if we're going to graph, we need to know that the aggregate demand curve is always downward sloping, right? Demand to the land, supply to the sky. We're comparing price level and real GDP. Now, this intersection here, okay, gives us the price level in the economy and the GDP in the economy. Wherever the SRAS and the AD intersect, we call that the short-run equilibrium. Okay. Short-run equilibrium is wherever the AD and the SRAS intersect. Okay? That's what determines your price level and your GDP. The LRAS, okay, represents your potential. And so when your LRAS and your short-run equilibrium intersect, that is what makes long-run equilibrium. So a good thing to think about, okay? Every economy is in short-run equilibrium because the SRAS and the AD always intersect. Not every economy is in long-run equilibrium, okay? In order to be in long-run equilibrium, that means that your short-run equilibrium, your current production and spending is equal to your potential, okay? So this is our long-run equilibrium, or we are oftentimes, we are operating at full employment. I think that's important to know because that's the way we see it worded most often. When an economy is operating at full employment, that just means that we are in long-run equilibrium. We're all good? Okay. Moving on. New page. Here we go. Let's talk about a recessionary gap. Recessionary gap. Same graph. ADS res. Equilibrium. I hope I'm not just teaching this to myself right now. All right. So here's our economy. We're in short equilibrium, right? To be in a recession, that means that we are producing below full employment. So my LRAS then has to fall to the right. And we label this YF. That's our output at full employment. That is a recessionary gap. Okay, and we are operating below full employment. Below or less than full employment. Remember, full employment is a measuring stick, right? It's a level of production. When we're below full employment, we're producing, or our production is less than what it could be. Okay? Which would mean then that our unemployment rate would be greater than 4 to 6%. At full employment, 4 to 6% unemployment. Less than full employment, we have a greater unemployment rate. That can be confusing sometimes. Then the opposite scenario, and real quick, it's important that, and I went over this when we talked about this during the semester, it's important to know that, when I just created this recessionary gap, I did not take an economy that was in long-run equilibrium and just shift the LRAS to the right. That's not what happens to an economy that's in recession. This economy would have been in long-run equilibrium, and either the AD would have decreased or the SRAS would have decreased, and that established then the recession. Okay? So I know it looks like I just shifted the LRAS, but that's not really what happens, right? The LRAS stays pretty fixed, and then other things happen around, right, to make it so we're either operating beyond or below our potential. So hopefully that will help you out. All right, last graph, inflationary gap. Price level, GDP, AD, SRAS, short run equilibrium. And to be in an inflationary gap, we are producing beyond full employment. Operating beyond full employment, which would mean that this economy is susceptible to inflation. That's why we call it an inflationary gap. It also means that our unemployment rate is going to be less than 4 to 6%. We will have very, very low unemployment during this scenario. All right, let's take a look at question 52. Yeah, I'm sorry, Hannah. Say that one more time. I'm sorry. Like an increase in consumer confidence would have caused this AD curve to shift to the right. So we would have been here, right? And we had an increase in consumer confidence that caused the rightward shift of the AD curve, and now we have an inflationary gap. So we would have started in long-run equilibrium. because every economy is in long-run equilibrium in the long run. Make sense? So what I'm saying is that it's not the LRAS that's shifting, even though it appears that way, right? Right. So any determinant of aggregate demand or of SRAS, not necessarily. If you're just told that the economy is in an inflationary gap, then you just draw it that way, assuming something created that. We don't necessarily know what it is, right? No. Mr. Farney. Shh. No, you would just have very low unemployment, and you'd have a higher chance of inflation, and you'd have a GDP that's probably growing pretty fast. Yeah. Okay? Rachel. So I would say any of the LRAS determinants are going to have long-lasting impact on growth. Okay? And all the other ones are going to be short-lasting unless there's a little bit of crossover between LRAS and SRAS determinants. Those can have short or long-lasting depending on what's happening. Yes. Yep. Does that make sense? All right. What did I say? Question 52? 52. Let's take a look at 52. So question 52. Assume that an economy is in long-run equilibrium. A shift in the aggregate demand curve will change. So this should be, as long as you know how to draw these graphs, okay, this should be a slam dunk. I'm going to go back to our long equilibrium, right? And it says that we have just a shift in aggregate demand. It doesn't even say if it's going to increase or decrease. So we need to know that anytime AD changes, both price level and GDP are going to change, right? So I believe, oh man, I didn't really look at these answers. This is tricky. So the answer that I'm looking for isn't there. Awesome. Yep. So this is actually a really good question to look at. So the reason why this is A, okay, is because in the short run, both would change, right? If we increase, let's say, AD, then we know that, or we can see in a graph that both price level and GDP would have changed in the short run, okay? But that answer isn't there. So if this was the scenario, what would happen to this economy in the long run over time? It would shift back to equilibrium. If we were waiting for this economy to self-adjust, the SRAS would shift to the left, right? That's always the self-adjusting curve. And we'd be at a higher price level, but unemployment and GDP would stay at its potential. Okay? And so that's why A is the best answer. It's seeing that in the long run, a change in AD is only going to change your price level. It's not going to change your output because your output is what it is in the long run. It's at your LRAS. Okay? So it's a good question. All right, I'm flipping it over. We got about 25 minutes left, so we'll see where we get. We don't need to rush. Whatever we don't get to, we'll just cover next time. So perfect. That question led us right into what we just did in the question, right? The self-correcting mechanism of our economy is always the SRAS. SRAS equals self-correcting curve. And we should know what causes that self-correcting process to happen. Okay? The curve, the SRAS will always self-correct because resource prices will always change over time. So let's go to our graph above us right here. Okay. We have, well, I guess I can leave that. We have an inflationary gap. Okay. When you have an inflationary gap over time, we're assuming now that the government and the Federal Reserve are not stepping in to do anything. So when we have an inflationary gap like our bottom graph there, over time, we're going to see an increase in resource prices because, this is key in understanding this, if we are overproducing, that means that we are over demanding, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but we are demanding more and more resources, right? If you demand more resources, eventually those prices for those resources are going to go up. And resource prices are an SRAS determinant. Once those resource prices go up, that's going to cause a decrease in the SRAS, and that's going to shift our economy back to its potential. Okay? And that will always be the case. The resource prices will always change to direct the economy back to equilibrium when we allow it to self-correct. That's important for us to know. Okay? We don't always allow it to self-correct, but when we do, it'll be the SRAS that changes when resource prices change. Questions on that at all? It seems like that concept shows up fairly often on FRQ questions. You're given a variety of scenarios that could get the economy to change, and letting the economy self-correct is oftentimes one of those things. Okay? All right, moving on. The financial sector. Yes, sir. Nowadays, we don't ever do it. But back in, like, before the Great Depression, the policy typically was let the economy self-correct and follow what we call the classical economic model, and that's just let the economy go through its fluctuations on its own. But we don't do that so much anymore. But we still teach it. If they said, assume that no policy action is taken, then you're saying, oh, then it's going to self-correct because we didn't do anything. Okay, Olivia, question. Yeah. So when we have an inflationary gap, the resource prices will always increase. When we have a recessionary gap, they will always decrease, and then the SRAS would increase. Does that make sense? And the key for me is the SRAS is always going to shift towards the LRAS, right? And resource prices and SRAS are always opposite each other. But if you know that it always changes towards the LRAS, then you should be good. Okay? All right. So we're on Unit 4. I'm going to go to a new page. Unit 4 is all about money and banks. I'm going to roll through some of this beginning stuff pretty quickly, okay? Like number 1, the definition of financial assets, money, stocks, and bonds. All I'd say is go back to your notes and just remember in your notes we wrote down the uses and the types of money, okay? The uses and types of money. Not a super important thing. Okay, you see a few questions here and there every once in a while, but not worth our time going back over. Okay. Number 2 on the list, measures of the money supply. Okay. Those measures of the money supply are M1 and M2 money. Okay, now M1 we need to know is all liquid forms of money, which would be like cash or money you have in a checking account. Those are liquid forms of money. They're easy to spend. We call that M1 money. Okay? M2 money is all liquid, so M1, plus almost liquid. And almost liquid money would be money that you have in a savings account or a CD, that's a certificate of deposit, or a money market. So it's a larger amount of money because we're calculating the liquid types of money and the almost liquid types of money, which that's what these things are. What about credit cards? Don't count. They're not money. Credit card is not money. Credit card is a method of payment. It is not money. Okay? Not money. All right. Moving on. Let's take a look at number 3 on the list. Banks and money creation. Okay? Remember this. I'm going to make a quick balance sheet. Everyone's favorite thing to do. Liabilities, assets. Okay, remember, the liabilities are the dollars that a bank receives. So this would be deposits. If a bank receives $100 in deposits, okay, that's a liability. All deposits have to show up as an asset. Didn't give myself a lot of room here. Our assets are required reserves. Let's say the bank holds $10. That means that our required reserve ratio is 10% for this problem. Now, quick reminder, the required reserve ratio is the percent of money that a bank must hold on to when a deposit is received. So when money goes into a bank, if this is our reserve ratio, all banks have to, they're required by law, the Federal Reserve controls this, right? They have to hold on to that percentage of money. So in this case, they're holding $10 of the 100 in deposits. The rest of the money goes into what we call excess reserves. That is the money that the bank has available to loan. Okay? Now remember, banks have incentive to loan dollars out because banks make money by loaning money and charging interest. So if you were a bank, you want to loan out as much money as you can. That's the way you're going to generate revenue for your bank. Okay? Now, the money creation process, okay, that happens through loans. So right now, it's important for us to know that this bank has the ability to create $90. They haven't done it yet, right? They only will create money once there is a loan that is created. So if you remember back to some of the questions I gave you during the semester, when I asked you, a deposit comes in, what's the immediate impact on the money supply? The answer was always nothing. There is no immediate impact until dollars are loaned out. Okay? Because right now, those dollars are just sitting in excess reserves. When this bank decides to get rid of their excess reserves and loan that money out, now, oops, that was a little scrunched. Now, $90 has been created. There's 90 additional dollars available in the money supply. Okay? If you take a look at question 7. No, hold on. Don't do it. Never mind. Wrong one. Wrong question. No, I want to take a look at question 19. No, I don't. Crap. Where'd that question go? Never mind. Moving on. We'll get to that one in a minute. Nothing. Okay. Let me move on first, and then we'll get to that. Now, this is where we get into the money multiplier concept. Okay? Stay focused. 15 minutes left. The money multiplier is always equal to 1 over the required reserve ratio. Okay? So if we know that our reserve ratio is 10%, 1 over 0.1 gives us the multiplier, which in this case would be 10. Now the significance of the money multiplier, okay, we take the money multiplier and we times that by, and this is hard, I never know how to word this when I give you this formula. I think in class I said new excess reserves. Oh, I wrote that small, sorry. It could be the amount that's loaned out. It just depends on the way the question's worded, okay? But typically, we're asking when a deposit comes in, what's the maximum amount that the money supply can change through the banking system? That's when you use that money multiplier. So the money multiplier times new excess reserves equals the max increase through banks. Plural. That's your key, okay? Because we're talking about when dollars are loaned out, okay? Those dollars get loaned out, and they're going to generate additional income and deposits, and then more loans. Okay, that's how this whole process works here. Say it again. What is being increased? The money supply. Sorry. The max increase in the money supply. Yeah, that's a significant thing I left out there. Money supply. Okay? So if we went back to our problem here, okay, and we want to know what does $100 allow the money supply to increase over time, we take the excess reserves that were created, which would be 90, times our multiplier of 10, and that tells us that over time, the money supply can increase by up to $900. 90 gets loaned out. That 90 gets spent, generates that spending generated income. Dollars get saved, right? Which creates another loan, and that process continues. So $90 available in excess reserves can generate up to a $900 increase in the money supply. Okay? Now, the factors that limit that multiplier process, we'll put limitations. I don't think this is on our sheet. No, it's not. Still need to know it. Limitations would be when people hold cash or if banks hold excess reserves. So they're not loaning everything out then. That makes it so the money supply wouldn't increase by the amount that we calculated. Okay? So let's walk through this one more time. Okay? $100 comes into a bank. Right? That bank loans out $90. Let's say that I get that $90. I took out a loan, obviously, because I want to spend money. Okay? So I'm going to take that $90. I'm going to go and spend it somewhere. Let's say I go and spend it at the pet store. I want to buy an iguana. Okay? So I buy an iguana for $90. Now, the pet store owner, let's call him Joey. Okay? Joey takes the money, and Joey's going to put that 90 in his bank, right? So all of a sudden, at a different bank, we've got a new deposit of $90, right? And this bank has to hold on to 10%. So they're going to hold on to $9, right? Which means that Joey's bank has the ability to loan out $81. And this happens again and again and again through multiple banks, multiple loans. And if we did this until there's no more money left to be loaned out, the maximum amount of loans that are going to be created because of our $100 deposit would be $900. Okay? So this multiplier just gives us a shortcut. So we don't have to go through all of the banks that are going to receive a deposit and loan money out. Okay? All right. Let's get to the money market here. Okay, and then we might stop there. Money market graph, the second most common graph that will be on the AP exam. Aggregate supply, aggregate demand. Money market graph. Remember, downward sloping demand. Vertical supply curve. This is the quantity of money. And the nominal, way to go, people. Way to go. All right, now, a couple things where students get confused. Let's not forget the demand for money, that demand curve. Okay, let's not forget it's the amount demanded as cash. The amount demanded as cash. That's what that demand curve represents in the money market graph. Okay? And our determinants for this curve are a change in price level. We already talked about that earlier tonight, right? In that problem that I showed you. Price level is one determinant. Income / GDP. And the third is bank technology. Those are the three things that cause the money demand curve to change. Price level, income or GDP, and banking technology. Now for price level and income, okay, it's just when price level and income go up, the demand for money goes up, and vice versa. For bank technology, though, it's the opposite. When we have better technology, what we find is people hold less cash. They keep their money in the bank. The bank technology allows them to do that. So an increase in bank technology actually would cause a decrease in the demand for money. Okay? All right, last thing. Woo! The supply of money. Okay, we'll say the money supply. Yo. Correct. They're really the same thing. Okay? Because you can calculate GDP by adding up all dollars spent or all income earned. So income equals GDP. Does that make sense? Okay? So the money supply, that's the supply curve here. It's controlled by the Federal Reserve. And our monetary policy tools are what change that supply curve. So we're going to get into this more next week, Tuesday. We talk about monetary policy. But real quick, they are the required reserve ratio, the discount rate, and open market operations, which are buy or sell bonds. Those are our three monetary policy tools. Those are also our three determinants of the money market. Okay? And what's really significant about this graph is this is the graph that we use most often to help us understand how interest rates are changing. Okay? And one quick thing about interest rates, because we see a lot of questions about interest rates. Nominal interest rate is a generic term. Okay? When the nominal interest rate changes, all other interest rates are going to change, like the federal funds rate. That's a specific rate. Nominal is generic. So when nominal changes, federal funds rate changes, the prime interest rate changes, all other interest rates change with the nominal rate. Okay? It's not really that important to know those other interest rates. Just know that all rates at banks change when the nominal rates change. Okay? Does anybody have any questions for me at all?